The church was silent, save for the soft rustle of silk and the faint sob that slipped from beneath the bride's veil. Every eye was fixed on her trembling figure, standing at the altar, her hands clutching the delicate fabric over her face as if it could shield her from the weight of 1,000 unspoken judgments. What had brought her to this moment of shame on what should have been her happiest day? And why did the groom, with a tenderness that stilled the room, step forward to lift her veil and whisper words that would change everything? Amara stood in front of the cracked mirror in her childhood bedroom, the white dress hanging loosely on her frame. It was her wedding day, but the reflection staring back at her wasn't the radiant bride she dreamed of as a girl. Her eyes were swollen from sleepless nights, her skin marked by the scars of a past she couldn't erase. The scars weren't just physical, though the faint lines across her arms told a story of a time when pain was her only escape. They were emotional, etched deep by years of feeling unworthy, unlovable, unseen. She'd grown up in a small town where everyone knew everyone's business, and Amara's business had been the talk of the town for years. Her teenage years were a blur of rebellion, running away from home, falling in with the wrong crowd, and a public breakdown that left her labeled as troubled. The whispers followed her into adulthood, "That's the girl who threw her life away." Even now, at 28, she could feel the weight of those words pressing down on her as she prepared to walk down the aisle. Amara had met Daniel 2 years ago at a community art class, where she'd been trying to rebuild herself through painting. He was quiet, kind, with eyes that seemed to see past her defenses. He didn't flinch when she told him about her past, her struggles with addiction, her time in and out of therapy, the scars she hid under long sleeves. He listened, and when she was done, he'd simply said, "You're still here. That's what matters." Over time, his steady presence chipped away at her walls, and when he proposed 6 months ago, she'd said yes, believing, for the first time, that she might deserve love. But as the wedding day approached, doubt crept in like a thief. The town hadn't forgotten her past, and neither had her family. Her mother, well-meaning but tactless, had asked if she was sure about wearing a sleeveless dress, her voice dripping with concern about what people might say. Her older sister, Lila, had been more direct, "Are you really going to let everyone see those scars? It's your wedding, Amara. You don't want to embarrass Daniel." The word stung, rekindling the shame Amara thought she'd buried. The night before the wedding, she lay awake, her mind spiraling. What if Daniel's family judged her? What if he saw her at the altar and realized he'd made a mistake? By morning, she was a wreck, her heart pounding as she slipped into the dress that felt more like a costume than a celebration. The veil, heavy and opaque, became her shield, a way to hide from the world, from herself. At the church, the music swelled, and Amara stepped into the aisle, her hands shaking as she clutched the bouquet. The crowd's murmurs felt like a chorus of accusations. She could sense their eyes on her, dissecting her past, questioning her worth. By the time she reached the altar, her breath was shallow, and tears burned her eyes. She couldn't do this. She couldn't face them. In a moment of panic, she raised her hands and pulled the veil tighter over her face, hiding the scars, the tears, the shame that threatened to swallow her whole. Daniel stood at the altar, his heart aching as he watched Amara tremble. He'd seen her strength, her resilience, the way she poured her soul into every painting, every kind word she offered others. But he also knew the weight she carried, the way shame could creep into her quiet moments and steal her light. He'd promised himself he'd spend his life reminding her of her worth, and now, seeing her hide behind that veil, he knew this was the moment to prove it. The crowd was silent, their eyes darting between the bride and groom. Some whispered, assuming Amara's tears were cold feet or some dramatic flare from the troubled girl they'd always known. Daniel didn't care about their assumptions. He stepped closer, his movements slow and deliberate, and reached for the edge of her veil. Amara flinched, her hands tightening over the fabric, her muffled sob breaking his heart. "Amara," he said softly, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "Look at me." She shook her head, her shoulders hunching as if she could disappear. "I can't," she whispered, her voice barely audible. They're all looking. They know everything. Let them look, Daniel said, his fingers brushing the veil. I see you. And I'm not going anywhere. Slowly, gently, he lifted the veil, revealing her tear-streaked face and the scars she tried so hard to hide. The crowd held its breath, but Daniel didn't hesitate. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears. You're beautiful, he said, his voice loud enough for the room to hear, but meant only for her. Not because of what you've been through, but because of who you are. You're my home, Amara. The words shattered something inside her. She looked into his eyes, searching for doubt, but found only love, fierce, unwavering, real. For the first time that day, she took a full breath, her hands loosening their grip on the veil. The crowd's whispers faded, replaced by the warmth of Daniel's gaze. The ceremony continued, but it was different now. Amara stood taller, her scars exposed but no longer a source of shame. She spoke her vows with a trembling voice, promising to love Daniel through every storm, just as he promised to love her. When they kissed, the crowd erupted in applause, not out of judgment, but in celebration of a love that refused to be dimmed. The reception was a blur of music, laughter, and clinking glasses, but Amara couldn't shake the lingering unease. She caught snippets of conversation, some kind, some less so. Her sister Lila approached, her face a mask of forced cheer. You looked brave up there, she said, her tone implying it was a compliment. Amara bristled but managed a tight smile. She didn't want to fight, not today. As the night wore on, an unexpected guest arrived, Mrs. Carter, Amara's high school counselor, who'd been one of the few to believe in her during her darkest days. Amara hadn't seen her in years, but the older woman's warm hug brought tears to her eyes. I always knew you'd find your way, Mrs. Carter said, her voice thick with pride. You're not that scared girl anymore. You're a woman who's fought for her happiness. Those words stayed with Amara as she danced with Daniel under the twinkling lights. But the real test came when she overheard a group of old classmates gossiping near the dessert table. She's lucky he loves her, one said. I mean, with her history, the words cut deep, but Amara didn't hide this time. She walked over, her head high, and said, I'm not lucky. I'm loved. There's a difference. The group fell silent, and Amara walked away, her heart pounding but lighter than it had been in years. Later, as she and Daniel sat together, watching their guests laugh and dance, Amara realized something profound. Shame had been her shadow for so long, but it didn't have to define her. She'd faced her fears, her past, the town's judgment, her own doubts, and come out stronger. Daniel's love hadn't saved her, it had reminded her that she was worth saving. As the reception wound down, Amara and Daniel slipped outside for a moment alone. The night was cool, the stars bright above the quiet town. Amara leaned against him, her veil long discarded, her scars catching the moonlight. I was so scared today, she admitted. I thought I didn't belong in that dress, in this life. Daniel took her hand, tracing the scars on her arm with his thumb. You belong wherever you choose to be, he said. And I'm choosing to be right here with you. They stood in silence, the weight of the day settling into something beautiful, something hopeful. Amara knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. The town would still whisper, and her doubts might creep back in. But she also knew she wasn't alone anymore. She had Daniel, Mrs. Carter, the few who'd always believed in her, and most importantly, she was beginning to believe in herself. As they returned to the reception, Amara caught her reflection in a window. For the first time, she didn't flinch. She saw a woman who'd fought, who'd fallen, who'd risen again. A woman who was beautiful, not despite her scars, but because of them. As Amara and Daniel drove off into the night, their laughter echoing through the open windows, the stars seemed to shine a little brighter. What makes a moment beautiful? Is it the absence of pain, or